I've watched through his eyes, I've listened through his ears, and I tell you, he's the one. Or at least as close as we're going to get. Today I'm talking about Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Ender is Ender Wiggin, and he's the third child in a family of geniuses, at least the children are geniuses. And he wears this monitoring device that tracks his thoughts, captures what people are saying around him, and also captures his interactions with those people. All this information is being recorded and watched by the military. It's part of sort of recruitment for special forces. He has a brother and a sister named Valentine and Peter, and they were both in the same program, except they didn't last as long, and they weren't selected. Peter is kind of like a bully to Ender. He's always trying to hurt him, and he's also kind of seems to be jealous of Ender because Ender is more successful than him, at least as far as the testing has gone. Ender is also bullied at school, but because of the monitor that he's wearing, like the kids kind of ease off. They don't go all the way with their bullying because they know that they're being watched. One day, the monitor gets removed from Ender, and right away, the bullies at school go after him. So the bullies attack him, and he ends up hurting one of the kids a lot, but that does stop the bullying. At the same time, Valentine always sort of gets in the way and Ender from his older brother Peter, because Peter's a bully. One day, this guy named Colonel Graff from the International Fleet, and this is sort of this army for fighting these space aliens. And so just for context, the buggers are the aliens or the bad guys that the whole sort of novel is directed toward. He shows up and he asks Ender if he would like to join. And he gives Ender the choice to come or not, but he basically says if you come, you can't ever come back. So Ender takes the offer and goes with the colonel to battle school. To get to the battle school, they have to go up to space, and their group of kids are called launchies because they're new. And on the flight, Ender's getting bullied. One of the kids is hitting him on the head. Ender, not realizing or not totally understanding gravity and everything, he kind of grabs the guy's arm, ends up breaking it. Sort of this creates a little bit of conflict. He is also the first student to realize the gravity, and so he kind of has better control of himself than the other kids do. And for this, he's recognized by the colonel, but the colonel also kind of like creates isolation because he kind of points out, oh, he's so smart. Well, he makes friends with another kid named Ally. They kind of figure out some different space maneuvers. So what's important is that because of the battle school is in space, it has like some rooms that have some different gravity. And so the kids have to kind of fly around to do the battles. All the kids have their own, in those computers, there's this game. It's called Mind Game. And Ender does really good at Mind Game. He kind of gets to the end, and then it seems like it's the end of the game, but then it creates more and more. We kind of find out through the story that the game is kind of created by this like AI or this computer system, and it's doing training. Or the adults don't necessarily know what's going on with the game. They just know that it's part of some kind of program. Ender is still very young, and he's supposed to still be just getting his initial training, but he's promoted to join an army. And on that army, he befriends this girl who's like the only girl on the team. Her sort of being a little bit isolated from the rest of the team. She's sort of willing to help Ender, and so she gives him some training to teach him how to play the battle game that they do, and also how to hold the gun and all this different stuff. The commander of his team, his name is Bonzo, and he's kind of angry at Ender. He doesn't like Ender. He wants to get rid of Ender. And so he gets angry about this sort of special training, and he says it has to stop. The launchies are the kids that Ender went up with. Because he's on an army now, he kind of sets up this training program with his other friend, Ally, and they are doing training, and they're training all these other kids. And again, his commander, Bonzo, is very upset about this, tells him to stop, but Ender keeps on doing it. Eventually, Ender is traded to another team, and he goes on to a specific part of that team with this leader called Dink. And Dink is a good leader. He's understanding, he's smart, and he's intelligent, and he kind of has a different perspective on things. And Ender kind of learns a little bit from this guy. Ender keeps on doing the training with the kids. One day during his training, some older boys come in, and they kind of attack Ender and the kids. Ender ends up hurting 4 of them. Meanwhile, on Earth, Ender's siblings, Peter and Valentine, they're on the internet, and they've created these like personas, and they're creating these like political views, and they're gaining sort of momentum, and they're gaining recognition online through their sort of conversations and spreading of these ideas that they have. Ender gets a promotion. He becomes a platoon leader. He's gaining respect. His training is going well. He's like on the top of the scoreboard. Sergeant Graff goes back to Earth and he meets Valentine. Kind of hints that he's aware of her connection to these online personas that her and her brother are trying to keep a secret. But he also asks her to write a letter to sort of motivate Ender, because he's kind of feels like he wants to give up. He's lost a little bit of motivation. And so Colonel Graff asks for her help. And she is kind of resistant. In the end, Ender gets a letter. Whether or not it is actually written by his sister or not is questionable. After this, Ender is given his own army, and it's a new army with a new name. He gets a whole bunch of young kids on his team, like mostly little kids with little training. And so he has to kind of start from scratch. There's one kid on the team named Bean, and Bean seems to be pretty skilled compared to the other kids. And so Ender kind of like goes and does the sort of same isolation things that were done to him. But this is, probably to help Bean become stronger in the long run. Ender is given very little time, less than what is usually given to an army, to train and get ready. Once their sort of first battle happens, and they keep on getting these battles at unexpected times with, multiple armies, like multiple battles in a day. And so everyone's getting exhausted, but they keep on winning despite the odds. Eventually, he is put in a battle between his former leader, Bonzo, and he ends up beating Bonzo. But then because Bonzo still has this grudge, finds Ender in the bathroom and goes to fight him, and through Ender's skills or whatever, he beats Bonzo, but he kind of has these, he's kind of haunted by the images of what Bonzo looked like at the end of their fight in the bathroom. After this conflict, everything gets changed up. The teams get changed up, and Ender is promoted to commander school. At this point, he kind of wants to quit. Graff takes him to Earth, and so he gets to stay at this kind of cottage. He's relaxing there, and he doesn't want to go back. He doesn't want to keep on going because he feels like he's being manipulated and cheated by the adults. He kind of wants to stop. And so Graff gets Valentine to come and visit him, and again, Valentine motivates Ender to keep on going. Ender agrees, and he goes back to space again with Graff, and then end up going to this ER planet, which is actually like a bugger planet. And so Ender is introduced to this kind of hero guy from the previous war, who he's watched a lot of his videos before, and there's lots of propaganda about this guy. And his name is Mazer Rackham. And so this guy becomes Ender's new training leader. And Mazer just runs Ender through all these challenging training sessions. He really pushes Ender to his limits. They also talk about how the buggers basically evolved from insects, maybe from ants, and that there's a queen, and the queen is probably the one that's guiding all of them. Also have this sort of new technology that they realize that escape space and time and instant communication to anywhere in the universe. So that is how the buggers communicate. While this intense training is going on, Ender keeps on having these strange dreams that he can't really explain, where he's seeing the buggers. Ender and his team, they just keep on getting put into these more and more difficult battles, and he just keeps on winning despite the odds. Finally, there's this final battle, which he is told it's his final test. For this final test, there's some different people who are watching him, and he doesn't really understand why they're watching, but they're there in the gallery. And because this final battle is against all odds, Ender sort of feels well, they've been cheating against me, so I'm going to cheat this time. And so he does the impossible, which is basically to have this special weapon, and he uses it to blow up the planet, which it seems like it's kind of like cheating in his mind, but apparently that's what it takes to win. And so he wins, and then he's told actually that all of his battles for quite some time have actually been real battles, that he was actually killing the buggers and that he was actually commanding the fleet. And so he's kind of surprised and hurt, and he's angry as well. But they tell him that because he has so much compassion, because he's so willing to understand the enemy, that only he was able to do it. And if he was told what was going on, then he would have been resistant and he wouldn't have been willing to kill them. We also find out Ender's never allowed to return home because there's lots of conflict. We find out that Peter has kind of taken over Earth and is the supreme commander now. And Valentine decides to leave, and so she's going to go and live on one of the bugger colonies. And so when she arrives on Eros, she looks for Ender and she convinces him to come with her. Ender also finds out that a lot of these people from the past, like the boy at school and Bonzo, he actually killed them. Kind of regrets it because he doesn't want to hurt anyone, but that's what he's kind of forced to do almost. He gets put in these situations where he has to do what he doesn't want to do. He finds out too that there's another group of colonizers arriving, and so they ask Ender to find a new place for them to live. And so he takes this helicopter and he flies around the planet, and he finds this sort of place that looks familiar to him, and he travels through it, and it's actually like kind of a replication from the mind game that he plays. And so he goes through the whole sort of course, and he gets to the end, and he finds this painting. Behind the painting, where in the game there was these snakes that hurt him, he pulls it up away, and he finds there's this like pupa of a queen from the buggers. Seeing this, he's kind of like has this realization that they never really wanted to kill the humans. They didn't even necessarily realize what they were doing, and it just kind of happened by accident. And so like him finding this pupa, he decides, or he makes it his mission to find a planet to let it go and live on so that the buggers can create a civilization again. And so that is the book. Now, some thoughts about this. I read this book a long time ago, and I really liked it at the time, and I found that it was really enjoyable reading this time as well. So I would say like this is a good book. I would definitely recommend reading this one. A big theme in this is games. And so like everything is supposed to be a game. Everything is like kind of framed as a game, even though it's not necessarily a game. Like so Ender's like all these battles that he has to get into, they're games. Battle school, like where he's training, he thinks it's a game. And even at the end, he's being led to believe that it's game, but it's not a game, it's real life. There's like actual serious consequences. And so even though everything's kind of framed as a game, it still has like real life consequences. The story, Ender's constantly being like isolated in one way or another. And this is part of like what makes him stronger. Like this is what makes him able to do what he's able to do. And so like it's to his detriment, right? Like being a happy person, like that's being taken away from him. But that's also, by taking that away from him, it forces him to be stronger and good at what he's like sort of destined to do. Usually we think of like wars being about adults, but this whole like book is about like wars being kids. And so like that's something kind of interesting. It's like a little bit different, like child soldiers, something that maybe people should be conflicted about, but in the story they're conflicted about it, but they sort of deem it as necessary because that's the only way to win, and they have to win at all costs. And kind of related to that is like Ender doesn't really want to hurt people. Like he wants to be good, he wants to do good, but somehow he just kind of gets into these situations where he's forced to do like bad, to hurt people, to kill people, and he doesn't want to do that. Part of the reason why Ender is so able to win is because of his compassion, because of his willingness to understand the buggers. He's able to beat them, but like at the same time, like that compassion is also like what would potentially make him a bad soldier, that would make him not willing to do what he has to do to win. Sometimes like we don't necessarily know who the good guys and the bad guys are. Like it's not always as obvious as we're led to believe. Like we get told, okay, these are the good guys, and so you have to view them as being good. But like that's not always the case. Like, you know, sometimes the bad guys are just bad guys because they're in the wrong place at the wrong time. So those are some of my thoughts from reading Ender's Game by Orson Scott Card. Let me know what you think of this review or of this book in the comments below. If you found this informative or entertaining, then click that like button. And if you're curious about my thoughts about other books, then click the subscribe button. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk next time. Goodbye.